I'm Becky Lewis. I'm the Strategic Safeguarding and Quality Assurance Service Manager for Bristol City Council. And as part of my role, I'm responsible for our strategic approach to exploitation and serious violence. And I'm presenting today with Charlene.
Yeah, hi, I'm Charlene Richardson. I'm the Safer Options Manager for Bristol Citywide.
And we're really delighted that today we have some colleagues from across the partnership joining us to help us out. So we'll introduce them later in the session, but Sunita, Callum and Khalil are all going to be supporting us today, which hopefully means you won't get too tired of me and Charlene, and we can give you a real flavour today of kind of some of the work that's been happening. This is one of the Keeping Bristol Safe Partnerships webinars, series of webinars that have been running since the start of lockdown, looking at specific areas of practice. We only have an hour today together, so we're hoping that we'll give you a bit of a flavour for some of the work and a bit of an idea about what's happening. And I can see I've got colleagues on the call who know much more than me in many of these areas, and so be able to chip in and join us potentially as we go. And then if there are kind of deeper, more extended pieces of training we want in the new year, then we can pick that up from here, and go from there. But this particular webinar was requested following the It Was Hard to Escape webinar that we did in, I think it was October, looking at the national learning from serious case reviews in relation to child criminal exploitation. And the plan for today is that we're hoping to look at kind of what is safer options, think a bit about the evidence base for the approach, help you maybe have a bit of space to think about how you fit into the work. And then we're going to hear about some of our innovations, some of the pieces of work that our partners have been doing with us, to look at kind of developing our response over the last few months, last couple of years potentially, and then hopefully talk a little bit about what 2021 holds for us. So as I say, a bit of a rattle through. So I'm going to start with Charlene.
Yeah, okay, so first of all, what I'll just go through about what Safer Options is. So Safer Options is an integrated citywide response to preventing and reducing extrafamilial harm. So that includes exploitation, criminal and sexual, serious youth violence, knife crime, and peer-on-peer abuse. And the approach we take is very multi-agency, and that includes internal partners such as our social care, Families in Focus, youth offending team, but also externally, we work very closely with the police. They're actually part of the team, and we work with the schools, and most importantly, we work with our community groups and the community, because a lot of this work is community-led, and that is because we know if we don't involve the community in identifying what are the issues and the concerns for them and involve them in the solutions, this work won't be sustainable. And so what the team looks like, well, I won't go into too much detail, it's on the next slide, but we have a central hub that is made up of our specialist workers, but we also have locality working teams, and again, those are multi-agency, and what we have is weekly multi-agency meetings, which looks at identifying the young people we're concerned about, but it also looks at the places where young people are and the peer groups. And what we do then as that multi-agency is gather intelligence and information on what is going on for these young people. Some of that is made up through data that we receive, sometimes through the police, or it can be data from schools around young people who've been excluded or are missing from education. But that works alongside our intelligence that we get from the community. So what we are not is, we don't hold cases. So safer options, it's not about referring into us, individual young people, but it's about sharing that intelligence so that we can make sure that we target our interventions to the right young people in the right places, and we support organisations to manage that harm and build capacity so that we can improve the outcomes and quality of service for those young people.
So this diagram hopefully gives you a bit of sense of the scope of the safer options work. So it goes right from, I think part of the last I was touching on how safer options approach is about all of us, all of our interventions that we do right across the city, all acting in the same direction to the same goals. And that it's the combination of that work that enables us to create change. So this just shows some of the broad range of work that's being coordinated through safer options. You might hear us also use the word violence reduction units. So safer options approach, a lot of that work was funded through the Home Office Violence Reduction Project. And we have police officer colleagues from the Regional Violence Reduction Unit who support us in this approach. So while in Bristol we use the word safer options, you might also hear the word violence reduction. And you can see that across this, we work right from the kind of widest level of community guardianship through to a kind of prevention and diversion offer for children on the periphery. So things like detached youth outreach, education inclusion officers, you're going to hear from education inclusion managers, you're going to hear from a bit later, who support inclusion and keeping children within education, young people's drugs and alcohol support, peer group counselling for children who've been affected by the serious violence their peers have experienced, responses to missing. So there's a really broad range of prevention work. And then we focus as well on resources for protection of those who've been harmed. That might be through specialist mentoring, specialist exploitation and missing services, right through to some of the support we have in place for 18 to 25-year-olds. So the Call-In project that works with 18 to 25-year-olds as a diversion from offending, that's supported through Golden Key. We have some criminal exploitation community mentoring for 18 children who are young adults who are 18 to 25, some group work, and also we are doing some work with supported housing to look at safety in those environments. And then we work in the kind of prosecution disruption area, mainly through Operation Topaz, and work with the violence reduction team in the police to look at the prosecution of perpetrators, looking at proactive responses to serious organised crime. So we've got this real kind of breadth of approach, and the idea is if we intervene from all the different angles, we should together work to a reduction of concerns. So there will be, just Charmaine's asked about the slides, we're going to put the slides online, so you will definitely have this at the other end. If I just click on.
Yeah, so this is me. So I just was going to give you a brief overview of how we've got to this point really with safer options. So originally we started working around looking at serious youth violence in Bristol back in 2018. There had been a few issues across Bristol, a few incidents that had raised a lot of concern, which led to some of our community leaders, the chief superintendent from the police and some of the cabinet members all went up to Glasgow to see what work they'd been doing, because they'd been working with serious youth violence. Glasgow's always had a really bad reputation around criminality, but what the work they'd been doing had been really successful, to the point where they got with schools that they have 0 exclusions of young people from schools. So they all went up to see kind of what is it they're doing that's worked so well. And they'd all been working from a public health approach. So they all from that visit and was like, that's great, we need to do that in Bristol. So we started some of that work late in the year of 2018. And alongside that, the government had released a serious youth violence strategy to address the national increase around serious youth violence. And as part of that, they announced the serious youth violence funding. And this was to support different cities across the UK to set up or establish violence reduction units across the country. So we were a bit of an advantage in Bristol because we'd already started doing that work. Originally, we were just focused on East Central in Bristol. And like I said, it was mainly around the serious youth violence and criminal exploitation. And the work's developed quite quickly. So by, I think it was around September time last year, once the government announced that funding, Bristol received some of that as part of the Avon and Somerset wide violence reduction unit money. So we were able to expand across the whole of Bristol, not just East Central. So we're one of 18 across the UK who have a violence reduction unit. And like Becky said earlier, we thought we'd call ours Safer Options because we wanted to have a positive aspect of the work. So since then, and this is going into this year, we've now integrated the work with sexual exploitation because we could see as the work was developing that there's a massive crossover between sexual and criminal exploitation. So that's why now Bristol's response is an integrated response to all exploitation. So this is what the Safer Options hub looks like. So this is our central hub. So myself as the Safer Options manager, and within the team, we've got specialist workers. So we've got a CSE social worker who some of you may know, who's Jo Ritchie. So kind of clues in the title there. A lot of her work is focused around the sexual exploitation. And what we're really lucky to have in our team is a contextual social worker, which is Amy. And this is looking at exploitation through a social work lens. But this is the work around which Becky's going to go into a little bit more detail about contextual safeguarding in a minute. But it's looking at peer groups and places. We also have currently vacant, but we have a reducing offending of children in care practitioner. And we've also got in the team missing engagement worker. She does a lot of the work when our children and young people go missing, does the return interviews. But that's where we start to link up when young people go missing to the county lines. And we also have Rachel Oliver, who's our intelligence investigator. So she's seconded to us through the police. And she brings together all that intelligence that we gather, whether it's through police data or information we get via schools or the community. And then underneath it just shows these are just some of our different partners that are involved. So like Becky was saying again, around Operation Topaz, we're linked, we're going to be working a lot more closely with them, which will fill that gap around some of the disruption work that happens with perpetrators. And we've got our commissioned services and our partners. So it's a whole system approach to the work.
So I think these are just some of the kind of deliverables from the hub. We're not going to go through them one by one because Charlene's already touched on lots of them, but their offer really to the partnership is through workforce development and training, consultation and advice, support in child protection strategy meetings, and really important work with grassroots and community organisations. They can support with providing you information to support any bids that you make to bring in extra resources into the city, sharing information and intelligence, support with building kind of capacity around safeguarding, We also have support from that group that we're developing, from that hub, around mapping peer networks, understanding links between children, and supporting that to be kind of mainstreamed within social workers, family support workers, community organisations, housing pathways, to ensure that we're making decisions for children that are based on kind of rich information. And so they also are kind of flexible and able to develop creative and innovative solutions. So if you want to do something, you think you've got a good idea, need some help, think through if there's any capacity or scope to support, then the hub can support with that. So one example recently has been the development with mounted police teams of developing a small pilot, helping young people who've experienced serious violence in the communities and exploitation to go up and meet the mounted police horses and do sessions with the mounted police and the horses to build relationships between those two groups, and potentially even lead to an apprenticeship for some of those young people. So that was an idea that someone in the partnership had, and we've supported them to kind of develop that and bring it in. So there's some real opportunities there for us to do things differently. There's some kind of key principles to our approach. The first is that we think safeguarding as everyone's business has become a bit of a kind of tired term, but what we really see is that it will take everyone committed to making change over a sustained period to have an impact. We can't change exploitation of children quickly. We can't reduce violence in the city quickly. There are really complicated factors that contribute to violence that children experience and young adults. And it basically needs all of us to face the same direction and keep going for a sustained period of time to start to shift the trend. And that's what we see as safeguarding as everyone's business. And what we really see, like Charlene has already said, is that you can't do that without communities, because we're not there all the time as professionals. So we need to kind of build safety and resource within communities. We also really believe that children don't live their lives in silos. Harm changes in communities. We know that children maybe be experiencing exploitation through serious or organised crime, and then experience sexual violence within that, or potentially grooming and radicalisation. And those risks moves and change, and we need to be agile in our system. And we're really hoping that we can start to break down some of the silos that means that children fall through the gaps. So where there's kind of complexity for kids across loads of different kind of needs, but we don't have the services that quite fit their needs, and they can fall through. So those kind of issues we're trying to work through. And we really know that we will need to retain a focus on early intervention and prevention whilst managing the highest risk. So it's really easy for all of our resource to get sucked into responding and protecting those children who are currently being exploited or experiencing high-end serious harm, serious violence. But we need to get that balance, because we need to get that balance with also really investing and resourcing those preventative responses that can help us shift the curve. And this work has been supported. There's been quite a tension over the last few years between child protection and safeguarding and prevention responses and community safety. And those of you who are at the last webinar will know that there's been a particular thematic review of child criminal exploitation. And what that found was that it needed the system to work towards this much more integrated approach, where you have both the community-led public health solutions and interventions that are preventative and engaged with grassroots community groups, but we also need statutory social care leadership. We need to recognise that some of these children who are being exploited through county lines, who are exploited through drug dealing and drug supply, sexual exploitation, organised crime, are victims, are experiencing significant harm, and requires a safeguarding partnership as well, and we can't do one without the other. And I think that's really where Bristol, we've been working our way through really for the last couple of years to see how can we bridge this whole system change. And that leads me to talk a bit about the Safer Options practice framework and how we approach this work. I want to be kind of really clear. Hopefully there's a slide in a minute. Oh, it's here. Our Safer Options framework says that we need to make improvements around individual children's safeguarding. So part of our work is about workforce development. It's about ensuring the safeguarding and prevention for individual children is high quality within existing statutes and early help frameworks. So if you're a lead practitioner for a child where there's emerging concern, if you've got a child who's working with strengthening families or families in focus, if you've got a child with a social worker, we need to have an offer. We've got developing our offer from the Safer Options Hub to help train you around how you do good assessments for children affected by extrafamilial harm, how your intervention and plannings look, how your risk management can be well coordinated across multi-agency partners. And we absolutely don't see the other Safer Options work as replacing that. So we need to do individual safeguarding and early help coordination well while doing the other stuff. So there's this, sometimes people can get a bit lost between the kind of peer group and place response or the prevention response from Safer Options and the individual responsibilities, and we need to do both well. So part of our approach is to kind of build capacity, skills and understanding for those people who are lead professionals for children in the city. We need to tackle the causes. So we need to develop a response that looks at tackling the underlying causes, getting the maximum benefit for the largest number of people. So that's our prevention work. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what that looks like in a minute. But essentially, we're thinking about some of the causes of increased vulnerability to exploitation. So issues around poverty, around school exclusion, issues around discrimination, structural bias towards certain children, vulnerabilities for children with disabilities, anything that enables any kind of context or place that enables crime to happen or encourages crime to happen, or where children can have contact with unsafe individuals. All of those things are areas we're looking at different ways we can tackle. And then we have a kind of response to coordinate a really robust multi-agency problem-solving approach to those most concerning areas. So areas where we know that there is, for example, organised crime, or we've got the children being recruited for county lines, for example, or high levels of sexual exploitation and violence, be that from a group of connected perpetrators in an area where unrelated children, unrelated perpetrators may have contact and there's harm, or between peer groups where it's really hard to untangle kind of who's the victim and who's harming the other children, because actually there's a kind of mixed risk picture. We look at how we have a kind of coordinated response to that. So we have a single plan with the multi-agency coming around that to combine their resources to shift hotspots and respond quickly. So Charlene and I have both talked quite a bit about a public health approach. I'm going to say what that looks like. Essentially, public health approach reframes any issue as one where the focus is on tackling the underlying causes rather than on using the criminal justice system to respond. So what you might hear a lot of people saying around exploitation is we can't arrest our way out of this. So we absolutely know that one of the pillars of our responses has to be effective disruption and prosecution of perpetrators. What we don't want that to look like is the criminalisation of our children. And we also know that if we don't tackle the underlying causes that leave people vulnerable to exploitation and crime, we're not going to shift it. So the traditional public health model is to look at those factors that increase vulnerability, increase crime and exploitation within the city and tackle those. So the emphasis is about getting the maximum benefit for the largest group. And the focus is on prevention. So you shift the risk and you look at intervening early. And so hopefully this slide you can see some correlation with some of what we've talked about for safer options. There's a real focus on tackling underlying inequalities. And what's really clear from both from CSE and from CCE, so child criminal and child sexual exploitation, is we know that there are certain communities, particularly for Black young people, who may be overrepresented as victims of crime. And that quite a lot of our thinking has been around how do we make sure that the services and resources and interventions that we use are accessible to those groups, because it may be that we are designing systems which are having good impact for other groups of children, but not for these ones. So that's been part of some of our thinking about some of the kind of bias and disproportionate impact that we have on different groups. And probably an area to touch on is, you know, part of that is thinking often people talk about girls as experiencing sexual exploitation and boys as experiencing criminal exploitation, and sometimes we miss the sexual abuse that boys are experiencing within that context, and girls we sometimes miss the criminal exploitation or county lines dealing that they're experiencing. And so we need to tackle kind of some of that inherent bias in the system where we are willing to see girls as inherently sexually vulnerable or kind of recognise their sexual abuse, and vice versa, see boys much more in the criminal frame. So we have to do that thinking. So public health responses look at kind of 3 levels of prevention. The broadest prevention is the primary prevention. So that's things like building in PSHE lessons for all children, help with drug and alcohol misuse, support around primary to secondary transitions for children to keep them in school, community development. So it's everything that kind of helps at the universal level. Maybe about kind of access for it might be parent education, those kind of things. Secondary prevention is much more targeted, so it's looking at those young people and children who perhaps on the periphery or at increased risk of being exploited or being drawn into serious violence. So we know, for example, that children who experience school exclusion are much higher risk of experiencing exploitation and violence, or those that are already involved who then experience exclusion will see a significant increase of risk following that. So we look at things like knife reduction programs. So if children have begun carrying knives or weapons, how can we intervene? That's kind of secondary prevention. In terms of CSE, it may be how do you do some work with children who are friends or siblings of other children who are experiencing sexual exploitation. And tertiary prevention is not quite the right word, but it's what public health use, is really in your protection space. So what are you going to do for children who are already, or young adults, because our approach does look at 18 to 25s as well, who are already experiencing this kind of harm. So it may be around support for children or young adults when they leave custody. It might be about the packages of support that you're put in place. We commission routes, and you're going to hear from Bernardo soon, to do some of our specialist intervention work following injuries from weapons. So it's about the work that social workers do. So it's how do we intervene for young people and children who are experiencing the harm already. And our plan is to try and have interventions that sit across every level of that system and work effectively. And we can only do that if we're all contributing. So there's clearly a really important role for health colleagues, for example, within this, around how they engage children around some of their health needs, thinking about things, for example, like children with SEND. All of those kind of contributions support us to move to a space where we know that harm is reduced. I'm realizing that I'm coming to the end of my time, so I'm going to rattle on through. So we take a public health approach to the broad system, and then we take a contextual safeguarding approach when we think about those our response to that tertiary protection area. And contextual safeguarding is an approach to understanding and responding to children and young people's experiencing significant harm beyond their families. What it does is it recognises that if you intervene with children in their family context, you won't necessarily change what's happening for them out in the community. So you're not actually influencing the place where the harm happens. And part of what the research shows us is children who experience criminal exploitation, sexual exploitation, serious violence, often their parents have very limited control or ability to influence the harm and safety for their child. And yet our safeguarding system is set up in such a way that we make decisions on parents' ability to protect, and we need to completely move away from that when we're talking about these groups of children. We need to be thinking about how limited parents' ability to influence that domain is. It's not completely limited. There's lots parents can do, and we need to equip them around that. But we shouldn't make that the basis of our decisions about risk and harm and how we should be responding. And so contextual safeguarding is about building tools to help us do that in the MASH at the front door, in your kind of safeguarding, in all your different organisations as you kind of make threshold decisions. What it does is it stretches the traditional reach of child protection from the child in their home right up into neighbourhood schools and peer groups. So it recognises that for these children, the harms happening in their communities, their schools and their peer groups may also be happening in their home. But it's about getting the balance. And what contextual safeguarding says is, to be able to have an influence in those areas, you need to pull in a different group of people. There are kind of different groups who have the ability to create change. So for an example, when we're responding to concerns about groups of children in one area of the city where they were there was a pattern over 2 years of really significant kind of violence from children towards other children, and we needed to get a crime designer on board and the social worker worked with the crime designer, looking at the area, looking at the lighting, looking at the CCTV, looking at what was contributing to that violence in that area, as well as us working with the children around that. And so what we are doing in terms of contextual safeguarding is we are, for areas, places or peer groups where we have that really top end tertiary level concerns for them, we are undertaking assessments, contextual assessments. Some of you will be very familiar with the assessment triangle as normally is. This is an assessment triangle for a neighbourhood, which might feel quite different. And we're piloting at the moment what that's like with a social worker being a lead professional for an area, or being a lead professional for a peer group, and coordinating that assessment and plan and then multi-agency response. So that's a kind of pilot piece of work that we're doing in partnership with the University of Bedfordshire, and that really complements our public health response when we think about how we make sustainable change, how we connect with our communities, because you can't do this kind of work without engaging businesses, without engaging local communities, thinking about who is in that space and how can we support them to make change. And this is similarly just another kind of diagram of showing how you can shift from doing a kind of eco map and a genogram about a family, which is probably a tool lots of you are very familiar with using, to starting to do that in terms of peer groups and thinking about how you engage with children as groups. And some of you will feel more familiar with that than others. Our youth workers here have been working with groups for a long time, and they've been absolutely kind of fundamental in helping us think through how do we shift from a kind of youth group to a kind of safeguarding focus on groups. So that's a very whistle-stop tour of those kind of environments, and we'll be offering some contextual safeguarding training in the new year. So hopefully that sort of whetted your appetite anyway. We are going to talk a bit about projects and innovations. Charlene, I'm wondering if we hand over to Sunita and then work our way through. I don't know if you wanted to give it a bit of introduction.
Yeah, this slide's just a couple of the different pieces of work that we've supported to develop across the city. So the new pathways, which Sunita's going to talk about in a minute, which is one we've done with the hospitals, and Callum will talk about the one that we've done with schools around young people and weapons. But another one that we've done, we've been working quite closely with our youth housing providers to do some of that mapping when new young people are placed in their provisions, looking at who else is already in their in the different housing places, to kind of do some of that risk assessing, if a young person that we know there's some conflict with, if they're placed in that same place, what the potential risk could be. Obviously, sometimes it's unavoidable, there's nowhere else for that young person to go. So then what we do is help them to manage that risk and put a package of support in place. Sorry, oh, lost.
Oh, sorry. Do you want to introduce Sunita, Charlene?
Yeah, so I'm going to pass over to Sunita, who manages the Roots programme.
Hi everyone, hopefully you can all hear me. I'm lit up on your screen. So my name's Sunita Watkins. I'm one of the managers within Barnardo's, but I'm here to talk about our Roots service, which is a partnership with Learning Partnership West. And I think I saw Rob's name up on the screen here a little bit earlier. So Roots is a service that supports children at risk of child criminal exploitation and serious youth violence. And we were initially funded by the Home Office, and now we're funded by Bristol City Council. So we're here at the moment until March. The bit that we're really going to talk about is our hospital pilot scheme. So I guess at the beginning, when we were thinking about what intervention was needed, it was really clear that Bristol is a diverse and busy city, and we have a number of hospitals within our area. And there is concerns around young people who are then entering hospital and being discharged when there are concerns around serious youth violence, whether that's assaults or wounds. And we felt it was really important that there was a service that was able to get in and speak to young people and their families at really teachable moments. I think that at the point where you were admitted to hospital, young people are a bit more open to speaking to somebody about what has led them to that place. And families naturally are really quite different for support and help. So what we've done is since October, we've linked up with the hospitals, and we have a referral process where if a young person presents with an injury that they feel is linked to any form of serious youth violence or any form of peer-on-peer violence, we try and steer away from the term gangs, really, because I think young people may be assaulted by their friends who are they're part of the same peer groups with, and I think that sometimes labeling like that isn't useful. In terms of what we use instead, I think this is all a learning experience for lots of us. We're not quite at a point where I think there's consensus around language that we use. So at that point, we will have a hospital make contact with our Barnardo's service. That tends to be the hub of everything that happens. We will take the details of young people and their families, and then we aim to visit them within 24 hours. We think it's really important that we go out and we see a young person. If they are still in hospital, we would ensure that they are medically fit. Obviously, it's really important that the priority is their health. What we don't want to do is be going into hospitals, distressing children, distressing their families while they're trying to recover. So far, we've had 2 referrals since October, which I actually think is quite good. I wasn't expecting many. I think we knew the numbers were going to be relatively small. So we had one really early on in October, where we had a 14-year-old, potentially 13-year-old male who had presented in hospital following being attacked in the community. His bike had been stolen, and then the person had violently assaulted him. We then went and spoke to him and his parents and explored the concerns around that violent incident, which is actually linked to another young person where there's been ongoing concerns around threats and violence and weapons. In relation to that case, we've then opened the case and supported the young person through the Roots service. We've had another referral, and that was for a 17-year-old who was attacked in the community by 2 males who had weapons. That young person was a little bit more difficult to engage with. The family moved them out of the city in terms of worry about risk, but my understanding is that they're back, so we're going to try and link back in with them and see what support looks like. And I think families do respond in the heat of the moment. I certainly know if it was my child, I'd be really worried about their immediate safety. And I think it's really important that if young people then come back to Bristol, that we ensure there's a follow-up response, because generally these incidents are not one-offs. And actually what we need to think about is what that pattern looks like in terms of risk for them, for the family, for the peers, and all the things that I think Becky and Charlene have been talking to you about in terms of contextual risk outside of the family home. So in terms of what we're hoping to do, we're hoping to work really close with those hospitals and get in and speak to children in terms of teachable moments. And it is past 18. So again, we were talking about that transitional age for young people with our route service being up to 25. So we're able to work with all of those young people and really ask hospitals to use their judgment, their professional curiosity, and for it not to just be those obvious signs around stab wounds, or actually when there's more subtle things around physical attacks and bruising in other parts of the body as well that we think can link to peer-on-peer violence, really. What we're hoping is that by the end of the hospital pilot, we can then do a little bit of reflection and some learning and thinking about what serious youth violence looks like within Bristol and what that looks like and how it presents within hospitals. And that will feed into the one-to-one work that we do at the moment with young people, and hopefully a broader picture around group work that we'll be hoping to do if things continue past March, really, understanding that young people are part of groups. Actually, if we really want to challenge and tackle and make some changes, that spending hours and hours with one young person when they go back into their peer groups is probably not the smartest way of us all working to try and create that lasting change. So it was a really brief little input that you had from me, but I guess the main thing is that Roots is here. We're supporting young people up to 25 at risk of serious youth violence, and that is boys and girls. I really kind of hone in on the stuff that Becky was saying about it being really gendered. When we think about CSE and CCE, we have had girls open to the service, and we do now. Those numbers are much smaller, and there's lots of thinking about girls being referred into our route service. And then what that looks like I say, moving forward in terms of our hospital work, our group work, and our one-to-one work. I don't know if there's questions that maybe at the end someone can collate, and then they can come back to me, and I'm more than happy to speak to anybody about it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sunita. That is really great piece of work there. It's very positive what you're doing. I'm now going to introduce Callum, who is our Education Inclusion Manager for East Central. He's going to talk a little bit about what that role looks like and some of the work that the Education Inclusion Managers have been involved in.
Yeah, thanks, Charlene. Hi, everyone. Yeah, my name is Callum Payton. I am one of 3 Education Inclusion Managers. My other colleagues are mentioned on the slide there. So I've got my colleague Ross Moody, who's in the north, and colleague Ingrid Hooper in the south. Each of us are based within the different localities in Bristol and kind of embedded in each local authority, locality families and focus team. We've been in post since September 2019, and since then we've had a good impact in safeguarding and improving the educational offer for Bristol's most vulnerable children. And just wanted to go through some of those things that we're doing, as well as kind of some of the pathways that we've introduced and developing. Do you mind going on to the next one for me? So I thought we'd just go through some of the roles and responsibilities that we are involved in. So predominantly, predominantly the first one we do is just kind of offering advice and signposting to education providers and social care. So we've built strong relationships with schools over the course of the year, mostly dealing with designated safeguarding leads and deputy heads, and with school partners in the local authority, the local authority officers and departments and SEND and so on, and the wider local authority kind of education apparatus. So we're mainly a primary contact point for consultation and intervention with schools for children, for signposting and building pathways for young people at risk of CCE and serious youth violence at risk of permanent exclusion. And we're there to kind of provide that consultation to improve the educational offer for those young people. We're also embedded within Families in Focus, so we are well positioned to support children's services and fifth colleagues to navigate the education system and to help resolve concerns and advocate on behalf of children to support their educational offer. And I think, you know, key to our impact is our kind of having a foot in both camps, so to speak. Kind of strong and supportive working relationships with social care on the one side and education on the other, and able to kind of mediate that relationship really successfully. You know, secondly, as mentioned here, we undertake this weapons in schools assessment, something I'm going to go into in a bit more detail. So we've had real success building confidence and dealing with weapons in schools incidents. So allowing schools to be more confident in the way that they can handle this feeling of risk of incidents of that sort taking place. I'll go into that in some more detail. And overall, we've kind of been contributing quite heavily to the city's agenda, improving practices and pathways to support the needs of the safer options cohort. So those at risk of CCE and serious youth violence, those at risk of multiple exclusions or experiencing kind of multiple managed moves and so on, or having kind of wider attendance concerns, which, as Becky mentioned, are all serious concerns that really increase the risk for our young people. So we've been implementing and developing procedures like the weapons in schools pathway. We're also developing a new one that we want to introduce around kind of drugs in schools. And this has involved kind of consultation and collaboration with critical friends in the police, around the youth offending team, in other community organisations and organisations like Bristol Drugs Project, and the wider kind of city council departments as well. So we're also regular members of the Bristol Inclusion Panel. We sit every fortnight at that forum and advocate heavily on behalf of young people who are going through that Bristol Inclusion Panel process. So these are young people with kind of families in focus or children's services involvement, or those that are kind of at risk of permanent exclusion or changing provision. And we ensure as much as possible that the best possible outcomes are maintained for vulnerable children, and closely support children and families throughout their transition. We also kind of are part of the local authorities' wider strategic groups. We don't necessarily need to go into that bit just for time. I'd like to go on to weapons in schools if possible. Let's move on to that bit. So the weapons in schools pathway, I think, is our kind of like headline feature, something that we've been kind of heavily involved with since the start. So in a real nutshell, the weapons in schools is a response to an incident in which a child has been found in possession of a weapon in school. So it kind of takes its leave from the National Police Chiefs Council's guidance of when to call the police. And we deal with cases in which a weapon has been found on a child in a non-aggravated circumstance. So the weapon hasn't, the child hasn't tried to use the weapon, it hasn't come out in a threatening fashion. That is a police incident, and the police deal with that accordingly. But in an incident in which a weapon has been found on a child, the school will give us a call, and they deal with the incident, including kind of searches and safekeeping of the weapon. But after that, an education inclusion manager will come into school with a youth justice support worker within 48 hours. And we talk to the child and the parents if appropriate, and perform an assessment, which is a kind of based around the signs of safety mapping. And we look into the kind of relevant contexts in a contextual safeguarding fashion of the ways that this young person is, to look at the needs more widely. And then we work really closely with the school to kind of minimise the length of fixed term exclusion. So we provide the kind of support and intervention to kind of really work with the school to alleviate their concerns and to help them feel able to manage the risk. And then we work with the school to maintain the child's place in that school, in their original school. And if the child cannot remain in the school for whatever reason, perhaps the incident was too severe, or the school think they don't feel that they can manage the risk to the child or to the wider school community, then we really advocate on their behalf to achieve the optimal outcomes at the Bristol Inclusion Panel. And we're closely involved in supporting the child's transition to the new school. The way we do that is we do things like we do additional work, including contextual risk assessments, arranging primary mental health assessments, encouraging referrals to targeted youth services, and if the situation requires, we'll kind of ensure that that young person is incorporated into the safer options cohort, potentially do some peer mapping with police, and also to kind of provide some ongoing coordination with the school's officer, just to really kind of maintain the school's confidence of being able to manage these sorts of incidents. After that fact, the incident recorded, on the police system, we take it to the youth panel, which is the Yachts Out of Court Disposal panel, where education inclusion managers were invited to sit and inform on the decision-making process. So the case is discussed with multi-agency partners at the panel, and more often than not, 6 weeks of intervention is delivered by a youth justice support worker and is allocated immediately after the fact. What's currently happening is that the yacht decision of what happens from a criminal perspective is often adjourned now. So we take about a 4-week period to review the engagement of the young person with the youth justice support worker, and then we all meet again 4 weeks' time and we discuss how the process is going, how the intervention is proceeding, whether we need to put anything additional in place. And then at that point, a decision is come to from a criminal perspective, and predominantly the decision is to take no further action from a criminal justice standpoint. So just moving on to, we've got some kind of headline figures. So far, we have had up to 23 weapons in schools assessments. That was from kind of February through to March, and then after the COVID period. Of those, 87% have been kept in their original school. That's a very small number of children for that percentage. I think it's around 2 to 3 have had to be moved on, most of which have also gone to a mainstream school. We've had 100% of those children have been supported intervention, but no repeat offences in schools. And importantly, we've avoided all permanent exclusions. So young people are really supported to be incorporated and maintain their educational provision from that. I feel like I've talked enough about this, so I may just skip this slide if that's good, Charlene. And yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Callum. Yeah, I am conscious of time because we're nearly up for our hour already. So I'm going to quickly pass on to Khalil, who runs Bristol Horn Youth Concern, and he's just going to talk about some of the work that he's been involved in through Safer Options.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Khalil Abdi from Bristol Horn Youth Concern, and thank you, Charlene, to invite me this. And we have been working with Safer Option team for the last 3 years. So we have delivered a flowing project. One of our success story that we're sharing today is the 3 top project that we delivered. So what I would like to talk about a community mentoring program that we have been working with the Safer Option team. So we have working over 20 young people from different communities. So we employ youth workers from the community that related for the young people. So the young people can understand that for the youth workers, so they can have more understanding because from the same community, which is working very well with us, because the young people build a strong relationship, trust when they work in that youth group, and it works well. So we prevent them from involving drug and criminal activity. So we show them that they can do positive activity. So we help with them make a positive contribution with the local community, especially with their community and where they live and the society. So and the young people have an issue when they involve some criminal activity, school exclusion, and they have nothing else to do, so to come to the street. So we prevent that. So we work with the Safer Option team to keep the young people in the school, which is working very well, and which is helping a lot of young people stay the school and keep doing their education. And we empower young people to go back to their education, which is very important for the young people, and keeping them safe and keeping them out of trouble and giving something meaningful, and which is working well since that we're working with the Safer Option team, and the parents also are very positive to see that young people going back to education, and the community really welcome for that. And we also deliver a detached youth work for the last 2 years, which is working very well. And one thing that we see local businesses when we go around community are really supportive, and they really happy to see us, to be present, to talk to the young people wherever they are, because there is a lot of places that hot spot in the inner city area, and we go in there every week, every other day, and see the people and see our presence, which is very helpful for the local people and the young people. And We tackle grooming for the young people, whether it's sex exploitation, gang grooming, so which is very helpful, and working the other agencies and build strong relationship and people trust the agencies so that the people, they can work with the agencies. And addressing the antisocial behavior. There is a lot of antisocial behavior happening. So talking to the young people and addressing the issue and talk about the antisocial behavior, and then giving something that to move the positives, like sport activity, whether it's a basketball, football, and refer to the other positive activity going around the area, such as like a boxing and helping them to go these places, and also helping them to develop their personal and to do workshops. So young people, they can gain skills and they can get a job. So young people, when they run a team, so they can be referees, so helping them to do some work and understand they can build their skills. And also help the local community to reduce fear of crime. So our present reduce that mainly, and people are satisfied, and also address the issue that have. One thing that we have, this area who are affected for the antisocial behavior, with the help of Safer Option team, we did a community meeting and talk about the issue they have, whether it's housing issue, antisocial behavior, and we invited the other agencies that related this issue, where the homeless people come in the area and they complaining, drinking, people using alcohol and taking drugs. And we invited all that in different agencies and bring the community together to talk. And one thing that we see very success, that community now doing monthly meeting with addressing their issue, so to improve the area, and which has become success, and also build a strong relationship to the community, to talk to the police, to phone the police when they have an issue and report the criminal activity happening in the area, which is before they didn't do, but now they community doing, and they inviting local beat managers so they can talk and address the issue, which is working well with that, and that's the working with Safer Option team, is to make it that link and build the community trust with the system, so that they can link with the talk to the system and address the issue they have. So another project that we deliver is to employment opportunity and role model program for the youth, that improving youth employability skills for the young people. So we have built a strong relationship in the local businesses in the area. So the local businesses are taking the young people, giving opportunity and build their skills, which is working very well, and also provide opportunity that gain interpersonal, social, and professional skills. So we invited a young people who used to leave the area and graduated local school or local university, coming back and talking to the young people and saying, I used to live here, now I work London, or I work Birmingham, or I work Bristol City Council or other company in the city, and we're just giving the young people aspiration for them, because they can see they can do themselves also. If that young people, they become success, I will become successor for me, because they got same school, same college, so which is very good and working well. And also helping the young people to create a CV and which is working well. And also we do create a link between professional businesses and young people to foster a positive relationship and promote role modeling. And one thing also we do, working with the young people, also young people teach them to help their community, to do litter picking, to respect the elderly people. So when the elderly people leave the area, to talk and to respect, not to play football around and kicking the windows or causing antisocial behavior, and which is working well. And young people volunteering for the area where they live and picking. And one of them in 2018 won award for the young hero, Bristol young hero, and which is making positive. And we see that young people contributing the positive things. And because Safer Option become like the linking up in linking to the agencies like the police, housing, other services, and the community, and which is working. And also the young people giving something meaningful, something they like, something that you cannot say, oh, you have to move this area so they can move another place, but you have to give something that the meaningful they can do it. So which is working well, and that's really reducing the fear of crime, antisocial behavior, other things that are happening, and helping the young people and support them, which is working well, and working also build a strong relationship other youth agencies or other such like the police or youth offending team and other groups working. So we really appreciate that when we are glad to work with the Safer Option team, and thank you for that. And there's not a lot of time, so I just want to say thank you.
Thank you, Khalil. That was brilliant, and it's a pleasure to work with Horn Youth Concern and all of our other youth providers. And I think you've just heard from Khalil like the importance of that connection between community and statutory organisations and what kind of wealth that brings to kind of the work with our young people. So thank you, Khalil. I want to say thank you to everyone who's spoken today. We've obviously hit 3 o'clock, 1 minute past 3. So I'm going to Charlene and I can stay on the call if anyone's got for 10 minutes if anyone's got any key questions, but just to wrap it up for the record for this session, in terms of how can you get involved, you're all involved already, so you need, you know, any action you take to improve the response to children affected by criminal or sexual exploitation, to support the prevention of criminal or sexual exploitation or serious youth violence, antisocial behaviour, or any of the causes of those things are contributing towards our approach to safer options. We'd really encourage you to review the accessibility of your service for those children and for young adults. You can share any intelligence you have about concerns through the police portal. So if you're out and about or you hear things third hand, or you don't have enough information to perhaps refer someone to first response, but you hear about a location, a potential perpetrator, or something you're concerned about, you can share intelligence through the police portal. And if you want to work with us on ideas or projects, we'd love to hear from you. If you've got ideas about what you think needs to happen next, you know, that will help us kind of shape our direction going forward. In terms of kind of what's next for Safer Options in 2021, we have a 10-year strategy to reducing serious youth violence and criminal exploitation. We have a wider partnership strategy as well about safeguarding children in our communities from all forms of harm, and we'll be working to all of those priorities. We're particularly keen to grow our 18 to 25 response and work with our colleagues and adults to look at that response for young people and when they enter adult services, and how we can make improvements at that level. Charlene, do you want to say something about connected communities?
Yeah, so we're going to be building on our existing relationships with our community groups and strengthening those, but working with those organisations to continue with us on this journey. Like Becky said, the strategy we've got is a 10-year plan. You know, this work needs time to be embedded so that we are at a stage where we don't need to be doing that tertiary work with young people. So part of that connecting communities will be about bringing all those, our voluntary and community organisations together to share best practice, to offer support and training to any groups, and that everyone kind of, signs up to the Safer Options strategy, and we all work together to prevent serious youth violence and exploitation. So that invite will be going out later on this week to all our community groups across the city, with a date set for mid to end January. Just one other thing that we'll be doing as well is we'll be developing a website in the new year, and that will have all this information about what Safer Options is, what work we deliver, but also we'll start to develop some resources and some practical tools that will be on there that people can use in their practice.
Thank you, Charlene. So watch this space. I know you've had some questions about where the presentation's going. It will be on the Keep Bristol Safe website by the end of this week, I understand. So we won't send them out to you all individually, but they'll be on there hopefully by Friday for you to access. And we'll obviously shout about it when we've got a website. But hopefully, hopefully that's given you a bit of a flavour for some of the work that's happened this year, which has been really exciting. And I feel like I'm jumping on the end of the bandwagon when you guys, many of you on this call have done loads of that work before I got involved, and it just feels really exciting looking at the year ahead. So thank you to all our speakers, and thank you to Charlene, and I hope that was helpful. Do get in touch on the Safer Options email address if you've got questions or you need to get in touch. Yeah, and we hope to see you soon and have a happy Christmas, those of you who celebrate, and happy holidays for those who don't. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.